Girls say he's the sexiest man in India. Ad people say he can sell anything. Music lovers say he's the best tabla player in the world. Those are just three of the ways of describing the man in front of me, but do they really sum him up? Find out for yourself as you meet Zakir Hussain. Zakir, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Karan. It's great to be here.
I have to start by saying, do you recognize yourself in those three descriptions, or would you choose to describe yourself completely differently?
Oh, I would say that just like any other person, I'm also a student of all these various activities that I'm involved in, and I'm learning a lot. So I don't know if I am the in it, but at the same time, I would say they are all a part of me.
You very carefully sidestepped the issue of being the sexiest man in India.
Never heard of such a thing. What is that you were talking about?
Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the phenomenon that is called Zakir Hussain today. I gather that virtually from the day you were born, your father determined that you were going to be a major musician.
It was a conspiracy, I have to say. I mean, I was not at all a part of it. I was brought home from the hospital 2 days later after I came to this earth, this world, and he picked me up in his arms and started singing rhythms in my ear, as opposed to what the religious person said, sing some nice spiritual words in his ear, say some words, and he said, okay, and then he started going takadigi, takatitikiti, takatitikatan, and all that stuff. So for him, that was, as far as he was concerned, the religious words, the spiritual mantras.
And it worked, didn't it? Because at the very young age of 7, which is an astonishingly age, you were giving your first public performance.
Yeah, but that was to get his attention. You know, he did the reverse psychological thing to me. He started this thing in my ear until I was 2, and then he promptly gave me away. And did not look at me at all, but started teaching his students. So then I would be, look at me, I can play. Come on, Dad. You know, but none of that stuff would bother him at all until I was 7, and I was totally hooked. I had to convince him that I could do it. So when I played this little concert, and then he said to me, okay, do you really want to study this? You know what's involved and all that? And I said, yes, by all means, and I will go with it, as you say. And then he started teaching me in earnest.
Except that he had a very strange and unusual way of teaching you. He wouldn't do it during daytime, he'd always do it late at night.
Yeah, I think the tradition in Indian music has always been that the masters always practiced at night. Because they were night birds. They played concerts at night, they came home, and then they kept practicing until wee hours of the morning, and then they slept through the day. So that was the routine. So he felt that the quietest time of the day was the night time, and nobody bothered, no phones ringing, nothing, and that would be the best time to teach me. And my teaching was not always banging on the drums. It was talking, telling history, stories, myths and legends of the old masters, and also talking about the music, interacting on a more personal one-on-one basis in an intimate fashion as opposed to just playing the drums.
But how old were you? You must have been 6, 5,
I was
7?
7 when this happened.
And it was 2 at night every time?
About 2 or 3 in the morning every time till about 5 or 6, and then go to school.
So weren't you sleepy?
I slept in the school.
That was your revenge, was it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, you want me to do this? We lose out on something. No, actually, I found the school benches very perceptible, very receptive to the hand.
Made for sleeping?
Made for sleeping and practicing.
So a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. I mean, best thing I want to get thrown out of class, I practice on the benches.
Okay, in those days, you used to handle your father's correspondence, and I gather when people wrote inviting him to come and perform, you'd write back saying he couldn't do it, but you offered someone else in his place, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I offered someone else, a very talented young musician, a student of his, and also his son. So, yes, I mean, because I was the only English-speaking kid in the house, and so I would reply to his letters. This is when I was about 12 or so, and could play concerts with masters. So I would substitute me for him if he was not around, and sometimes I would get away with it, sometimes I wouldn't. I mean, they wanted the master, and if he was not available, then they'd go find some other master.
There was an occasion when they actually accepted your offer of yourself, and you had to go to Ara, but it didn't end quite as nicely.
No, it didn't quite end the way, and Ara, you know, it's like boondocks compared to Mumbai, and you have to be in a train for like 2 days, and, well, 2 nights and 1 complete full day, and it was tough for a young 12-year-old to do that. But I did, and I went over there with my tabla and arrived to play with a concert with some musicians who were there, and the organizer failed to receive me at the station, And it was simply because he just bypassed me. He didn't think I was the one. He expected somebody in dhoti, kurta, pan in his mouth, you know, kind of older.
This little boy, perhaps in shorts, wasn't what he was looking for.
He wasn't looking for me. And then finally, he saw the bag, which looked like a tabla bag, and he said, "Are you with Zakir Hussain?" And I said, "No, I am Zakir Hussain." And he said, "Oh, I expected someone older." So anyway, he brought me in, and I played the concert and got off after having played the concert. And then, like all other musicians, I also started looking for the organizer, who had promptly left with all the cash.
And you weren't paid?
And I wasn't paid.
So you were 12 years old
I was
in Agra
12
with no
with
money.
about 12 rupees or 11 rupees in my pocket, and no way to get back home to Mumbai. And but there was one musician who actually helped me, in a sense that he brought me to Banaras with him. So he was a musician from Banaras, and in Banaras I knew of a student of my father who lived there. So then I contacted him on the phone at his, because I had those numbers. I was lucky or smart enough to bring it with me because it was nearby. And then he arranged for me to finally get home. And
when you got back,
firing range.
And when you got back, what did your parents say?
My father wasn't around, but my mother made sure that I knew that I had done some mischief in more ways than you could imagine.
In fact, in those early days, am I right in believing that although your mother was very proud of you, she didn't really want you to be a musician?
No way. I mean, in those days, mothers always wanted their sons to be doctors or engineers. Nowadays, it's cricketers or musicians, but in those days, it was doctors or musicians.
It was also, wasn't it, because musicians weren't the most highly paid profession at the time?
We were like, yeah, and also the music was not as widely received and accepted as part of the way of life today as in those days. And even in the realm of music, the tabla players were like second-class citizens. They came later. It was important for her to think that I would have a profession I could fall back on.
She wanted something better for herself.
Something better, 9 to 5, and steady income coming home every month. And that was important for her because, I mean, she had spent most of her young life waiting for my father to bring home the bacon. So she didn't want to have to worry about that with me, and she wanted me to have a better life. And in that, she became partly successful in the sense that she actually helped to educate me, which was something that...
She was the one who insisted that school was
I go
important.
to an English school and study English and, all that stuff.
So if your father was the person who actually ensured that you became a musician, your mother is the person who ensured that you got educated, that you were able to stand up for yourself.
Stand up for myself and be able to interact better with people all over the world. And so they both accomplished together what was needed for me to be able to be.
Take me back to those early days. What sort of family was it that you were born into?
Oh, well, it's a Muslim family. My mother is a very conservative Muslim, and my father, although he is a Muslim, he's more a musician, so he's a Sufi in a way, because music in India is a concoction or confluence of Hindu and Muslim culture. So it's a way of life on itself. And we grow up worshipping Saraswati because she's the goddess of music, and we believe we are all pujaris of Saraswati. And the music has been handed down from Shiva's damru to Ganesha's pakhawaj to Krishna's flute, and so all that comes together. So here you are in a Muslim family, and then you have these other elements involved in there. So my mother, frantically trying to make sure that my sisters go to a Islamic school and study Urdu and Arabic and blah, blah. And my father making sure that I go to concerts and listen to music, and all his students are Maharashtrians or Gujarati and whatnot, and I'm basically mixing in that and coming back home and going to a Catholic school.
It sounds like a very liberal, eclectic, and so different to the traditional background Muslim children have.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the way I was brought up, and my father, I guess, was instrumental in providing the liberal attitude along with the tradition of music. So there were roots, and my mother brought in the tradition of a family of certain cultural roots, like being a conservative Muslim or something. So there were both traditions kind of coming together, gelling together, and I think I was lucky enough to not get totally confused, because the third one was the Catholic school, where I had to go to church on Wednesdays and attend the novenas and Saturday masses and stuff. So it was rather confusing for me to be, as a child, wondering where my allegiance lay. for a while, but then I figured it out that my allegiance was to the music, and that was the way of life for me.
And as you say, allegiance was to music, and that allegiance took you right to the top. But tell me, today you're not just a major star. Often when you're playing, you're a bigger star than the person you're accompanying, and yet within the context of the performance, you are strictly an accompanist. Is that a contradiction, or is that where the trick of being a tabla player lies?
It is a challenge as a tabla player to be famous, to be well known, and then to be expected to entertain when you're on stage and show your stuff when you're playing, keeping in mind totally that you're playing with somebody where you're not supposed to take over. So it is kind of a difficult thing to be patient, to curb your desire to display your wares, and so in the context of playing with a musician like Ravi Shankar ji or Ali Akbar Khan or Shiv Kumar Sharma or anybody, I'm strictly an accompanist, so I'm subordinate, I'm following them. But at the same time, I'm an important part of the performance in the sense that from a little bud to a complete bouquet, we have to harvest the field together. We have to make this happen together. When a musician is performing and I'm playing with him, within the first minute or two, I have to judge and analyze what this musician is feeling at the time, what he's going through, and what he's trying to express through his music, his temperament, his feelings, his emotions. And so in that sense, I'm almost a psychiatrist.
Hearing you speak about it, you make it sound so easy, but I imagine it's actually quite difficult.
It is quite difficult in the sense that to get to that point, I must know each and every aspect of the music. So I must know what folk music is, what classical vocal music is, what classical instrument music is, what dance is.
And what happens when things go completely wrong? Has that happened ever?
It has happened. Things do fall apart every now and then. I mean, you just don't sleep at night and you hope that it will never happen again. But you do tend to run into situations where you meet a musician and you've never played with him before, and the guy comes up with something so unusual and unique, and you're like, what do I do? So you sort of, you hang on for dear life and hope that he, after a few minutes, realizes that, it better come down to something more accessible. And this has happened to me with people like Ravi Shankar or Ali Akbar Khan, because they're so incredible musicians, and they come up with some fancy stuff where, you just like totally at sea.
Well, I want to come up with some fancy stuff if I can, but I want to do it now by taking you in part 2 into the world that opened up for you when you went abroad at the age of 19. Let's take a quick break and come back and talk about what America and the West has meant for Zakir Hussain.
By all means.
See you in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. My guest is Zakir Hussain. Zakir, in the last 30 years, you spent quite a lot of your time in America. Looking at your career, how important for you was the decision at the age of 19 to go to America with Pandit Ravi Shankar?
It was the single most important decision I ever made, but in some ways the decision was already made for me, at least in its initial push. What I mean to say by that is that my father got sick, and somebody had to replace him in the first few concerts of Ravi Shankar, and they felt comfortable enough and confident enough in my ability to come out there and replace them.
So God, in a sense, made the decision by making your father sick.
So I ended up in New York and at the Fillmore East, which was a famous auditorium at that time, and to play with Ravi Shankar ji. And the first thing that he said on the stage when we sat down was to the audience, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you must be wondering why Allah Rakha has suddenly gone so thin and young." And then he said, well, it's not Allah Rakha, but in a sense his spirit is here, this is his son, blah, blah, blah. And then I played the concert, and then we did a few more. But the one interesting thing that happened, and Ravi Shankar ji was instrumental in that for me, was that he said, so what do you want to do now? And I said, well, I guess I have to go back home. And he said, well, you're here, and there is an opening at the University of Washington in Seattle for an assistant professor for music in the World Music Department, the Ethnomusicology Department.
And you were only 19?
And I was 19. And they want you, do you want to go? And I was kind of hesitant, and he said, well, it's a great opportunity. Think about it. You're a young man. You're here for a while. Why don't you? So in a way, he helped me to make my decision, and so I went, and there I was at the university, and God, the whole world opened up to me. I mean, I did not realize that there was so much there which we don't have in India, available to you at your fingertips.
And you dabbled in a lot of it. I mean, in a sense, one of the things you did in a big way was to get involved with fusion music.
Oh, yeah.
Shakti, the Diga rhythm band,
Yeah,
Khalid
that
drum.
was the next step to it. But when I first arrived there, I suddenly, you know, you arrive in, when you leave India, you have this attitude. The attitude is, I am the keeper of a 5,000-year-old tradition. No one has this in the world. We really are the best. We're unique. We are the teachers. So come to us and learn. We don't realize that there are equally old traditions existing all over the world.
So America taught you humility.
Yeah, it's suddenly, I mean, I had to very quickly become very humble. And, you know, I used to stand in front of the mirror and say, I'm humble, I'm humble, I'm humble, 500 times. And then I graduated to, I'm very humble, whatever. But the fact is that I realized that there's Arabic music, there's African music, there's Indonesian gamelan, there's Chinese classical, Japanese classical, Korean music, all kinds of music.
And fusion, in a sense, was part of this awakening.
Well, this was the awakening that was taking place on the West Coast in America, where people were suddenly starting to realize that there are other traditions out in the world which are incredible. So I just jumped headlong into it, into studying African music and Middle Eastern music and Indonesian gamelan and so on, to try and do my PhD in music.
But you know, it wasn't just world music that you entered, you also began something else. You began later on to contribute to films. You did the music for Apocalypse Now, for Little Buddha.
Yeah.
Was that a natural step, or was that an offer you just couldn't refuse?
It was a natural step. You see, my father was a music composer for Indian films here, so I grew up listening to that happen. So the bug was there. I mean, Indian films, and I played in a lot of Indian film songs and stuff. So when I was abroad, there was this kind of a thought that existed that I want to explore every possible venue in terms of music. So playing fusion music, like working with the Grateful Dead or Shakti or Van Morrison or Earth, Wind and Fire and stuff, was happening at the same time. But Mickey Hart, who's a great old friend of mine, who's a drummer for the group called Grateful Dead, and I formed a team together, and he was the one who'd find work because of his name, and so he brought Apocalypse Now to us, because Francis Ford Coppola lived in the Bay Area, and he still does, and so he gave us the film, and then we put the music together. In fact, in the film, the last 12 minutes of the film where Marlon Brando gets killed is totally done by me. And so when that happened, I got an opportunity to do that, but the bug was already there from India, so it seemed like it was a natural progression. And then I did Merchant Ivory's film, and then recently Little Buddha with Bertolucci.
Now, ought you call it a bug? It should be called a flower, because it's blossomed on so many different occasions. I gather you even did the Olympic music in 1996.
1996 Atlanta Olympic, we got to do the opening ceremony of the film along with John Williams. John Williams was the next piece, and ours was the very opening piece of the music, and it was called Call to the Nation. And it involved 400 drummers and 100 singers. That's all. Just drums and voices.
Okay, while all this was happening and coming together, your life also was, in a sense, in an emotional direction changing. You met the lady you married, Antonia.
Yes.
How did you meet her, and what made you fall in love?
Well, I was in California at the college teaching music, and she came there to study Indian dance. Kathak dance, classical dance, and she's a lady who was born in New York and of Italian origin, but she is really into India and Indian stuff. So in the early 70s, she came to California to study classical Indian dancing, Kathak, and I ran into her and promptly invited her for a burger. And and then we got together, and we sort of saw each other off and on for a few years, until we finally decided to you know, live
Your
together.
parents on both sides weren't quite in favor of it initially, but then in the end I gather your father helped resolve the problem.
Yes, because of his liberal nature and having traveled all over the world, he was more open to this idea, and he loves Tony. He thinks she's just fabulous, and so he helped decide it, but we had to go through 3 different ordeals. We had to...
One of which was a secret marriage as well, because you married without them knowing.
Without them knowing, the civil one first, and then we had to do the church wedding, and then we had to do the Muslim wedding, so...
So you're a much married man.
Much married man 3 times, and...
but always to the same wife.
Always to the same wife. I don't know how that came about, but there it is, and I'm very happy.
Zakir, you've had a lot of recognition in your life, and well-deservedly so. You won the Sangeet Natak Academy Award, you won the Padma Shri, you won the National Heritage Fellowship.
Yeah.
But I gather you found out about the Padma Shri in a very unusual, strange way.
Oh my God, what an... In fact, the finding out about it was much more meaningful to me than actually going to receive the award, because I was, you know, they announced the Padma Shri Awards on the night of the 25th for the newspaper to come out on 26th morning. So the newspaper comes out about 3 or 4 in the morning, and there was a concert at Xavier's College, Quadrangle in Bombay, and I was playing with Ravi Shankar, and my father was sitting in the front row in the audience, and the Times of India printing is like a block away or something. So at about 3:30 in the morning I'm playing, and suddenly this man comes running. He's got a paper in his hand. He runs over to my father in the front row, which is a no-no when Ravi Shankar ji is playing, and whispers in his ear. My father jumps up, and then he runs over to the announcer guy, and I'm wondering what's going on. I thought maybe somebody died, something happened, what's going on here? And then they waited till Ravi ji finished, and then this announcer ran over to the stage, and he whispers in Ravi ji's ear. Ravi ji smiles, puts his sitar down, looks at me, looks at the audience and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, Ustad Zakir Hussain," that's the first time he called me an Ustad, has just been awarded the Padma Shri. And everybody erupted, and then my father just jumped up on the stage with a garland, and he garlanded me, and it was a very especially emotional experience for me.
It's absolutely amazing. You've achieved so much, and yet you're not even 50 years yet. Is that a source of satisfaction, or sometimes do you say to yourself, my God, I've got so far, where do I go now?
It's a very, very difficult thing. I mean, sometimes I'm worried, I'm afraid, I fear, where do I go next, what do I do? But the fact is that I go and see my father, who's 81, and he sits on his drum and he becomes 41. He becomes a young man. I mean, it's like rejuvenation. It's like he's plugged into...
He remains an icon you're going to follow.
I'm going to follow him, but at the same time I realize that he's still learning. And I realize that there's more. There's miles to go before I sleep. And its secret is keep learning, keep sorting things out, make it possible for people to understand it, simplify the learning process. There's a lot to do.
Zakir, you said there's miles to go before we sleep. Unfortunately, there's not miles to go before this interview ends, but there is one thing I want to ask of you. I believe one of the things, maybe you're not learning publicly, but you sing, and no one's heard Zakir sing, so sing for us something.
Sing for you. Okay, what should I sing for you? A song that I composed, okay? रात ढलने लगी, बुझ गए हैं दिए, राह तकते हैं हम, जाने किस के लिए.
Let me take a line of yours and say, Wah Ustad. Zakir, thank you very much indeed.
It's a great pleasure.